What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Hart for those of you that are new. And today I'll be breaking down the 6 game NBA slate here for Tuesday night on DraftKings. Kind of talking through my favorite players, who I like, who I don't like, having like a first round look at kind of my player pool, who I'm kind of looking to target, kind of build around. Obviously, with the injury news, it all changes. Also, just want to say Happy New Year. Hopefully, you guys get a ton of takedowns this year. Let's get right into this slate breakdown. So, for the first game here, obviously, there's some blowout risk. I think the spread right now is 10.5 points because Embiid is back. So, for the ball side here, obviously, the three guys you're going to want to target are probably DeRozan and Kobe White. And then I think a tier below would be Drummond. He'd be more so a very, very contrarian GPP option just because minutes haven't been too great recently. Very, very foul prone. And he has to guard Embiid and the blowout risk. So a lot of things, not pointing to Drummond in this matchup here. If he can stay out of foul trouble, obviously he can absolutely smash there. As you can see, 2 out of the 3 games so far in the starting lineup, he's gone for pretty much 55 or more fantasy points. Obviously, he has a very low floor, though, especially with the foul trouble risk. So, more so stay away from me. I think DeMar is a very strong option. Same thing with Kobe White. They both should see close to 40 minutes and shoot anywhere from 15 to 20 plus times. So, they both look really, really strong. If you think this game stays close, I think Pat Williams is a fine mid range play. He'll be decently aggressive. Solid play there. I prefer getting to Caruso. Obviously, not as good of a shooter, but he should be needed for his defensive capabilities guarding Tyrese Maxey. So I do think he should see close to 30 minutes, if not a few more. So I do think he's a pretty strong play. In terms of the bench, maybe you could take a shot on a guy like Terry Taylor, whose minutes haven't been increasing a little bit there due to blowout. But obviously, if Drummond gets in foul trouble, they really have no backup bigs. I mean, they have Terry Taylor and Sonogo. That's really it. So the Bulls are kind of screwed if Drummond gets in foul trouble because no one's going to be able to stop Embiid. So maybe you could go with that blowout risk or that foul trouble risk route of maybe playing Terry Taylor or Sonogo if you think this game gets crazy or if there's a ton of foul trouble for the bigs there. Drummond trying to guard Embiid. On the Philadelphia side here, Embiid looks absolutely fantastic there. Don't think there's any sort of minutes restrictions or limits right now. So he looks absolutely amazing against Drummond defense. I think Maxey still is a very strong play. Harris is fine. Melton is out. So with him being out, so let's to see what they do with the starting lineup there. See if they slide Kelly Oubre back in. See if they bring a guy like maybe Pat Bev. They want to get super weird, or maybe they'll just throw out Maxey, Harris, and Bede. Probably Oubre, I would assume, and then maybe Batum. But they could get weird. Maybe throw in Marcus Morris. Obviously, maybe a Covington. I think these guys are fine value plays. Nothing really sticks out too much to me. Batum would probably be the safest just because it seems like they do like him the most in terms of the minutes, but obviously not the best offensively. So kind of gross in terms of value down there for the 76ers. But it really just depends on kind of that starting lineup. So what to wait and see with the news there. For the Spurs side here versus Memphis, obviously some blowout risks. Victor is there 8.5. I mean, he has the upside. It's just, will the minutes be there? Will this game stay close enough for him to kind of get there with the minutes that are in question at times? So I think he's a fine play there. Obviously, has a massive ceiling with the blocks. Vassell, especially if Keldon Johnson's back, even though he's kind of been moved to the bench, coming off the bench. I think he's a fine play, 7,200. Don't love the price tag for him. Same thing with Keldon Johnson. I mean, Zach Collins is out. You'd think that'd open up value. It just hasn't. Everyone's just kind of priced about right for me. Trey Jones is fine. Same thing with Branham. And that's really it. I mean, Mamu, need more minutes just because of blowouts. It's just like this team is just disgusting to see on a slate every single night. On the other side, obviously, fantastic matchup here for the Grizzlies. Really like Morant is more so a risky spend up option just because of blowout risk. Bain and Jaren Jackson Jr., I think, are very strong secondary options. And I do think Marcus Smart is an interesting play. 5,800, pretty cheap. Seeing 30 plus minutes past 2 games there. Has decent upside if he, hits his shots and if he's decently aggressive. Because there's those times when he's playing alongside those guys that he takes like 4 shots and it kind of screws you. But I do think he comes at an interesting price tag. And I do really like Luke Kennard here as a very cheap value option. 4,100, played 20 minutes back in his first game there. Had a solid game there. Very score independent, but they will need his playmaking off the bench. So I do think I have a good amount of interest in him. Moving on to Boston here versus OKC. With a fully healthy team for Boston, we know the offense is going to run through Tatum first. And then it'll filter through 2 guys like Porzingis is kind of the second option tied with Brown. And then White and Holiday are kind of the third, fourth options. At their price tags, I think Tatum is the best. Porzingis more so a solid GPP option there. And I do have a little bit of interest in Holiday, even though he absolutely screwed me there in that last game, having his worst game of the season with no Tatum and Porzingis. Wild stuff there. 23 fantasy points. Very frustrating, but yeah, not a ton to like here for Boston besides pretty much those two guys. Not much value I like either. They run a pretty tight rotation. Moving on to OKC here. Very solid price tag here for SGA. Like him coming off a bad game DFS wise, but overall real life wise, pretty solid game. 24, 6, and 4. Chet's been a very strong option there in the mid range. So if you land on him, I think he's a very solid play. Once again, the minutes have not been the best, kind of like Victor, but he's been very, very efficient. As you can see, pretty much averaging like 43 fantasy points per game the past like 10 games. So I do have some interest in him. Giddy and Williams are fine in the mid range. It's just the minutes for Giddy. That's just kind of the question there. Lou Dort, I do think I have some interest in him just because they're going to need his defense guarding these Boston guys. So he should see 30 plus minutes. He's their best defender. I've seen not the best offensively, but 4,600, 30 plus minutes. Don't mind him if you land on him. In terms of these other guys, I mean, they're going to play Joe, Wallace, Williams, and the other Williams. So they run like an 11-man rotation. Very frustrating just because it makes these guys, even though they're very cheap, not really worth it. I think the best option would be Kenrick Williams, center, power forward eligible. One of those guys that can, stop the stat sheet in terms of, a few random rebounds, a couple assists, maybe a block or steal, maybe a couple of baskets. So 3,300 probably be the most interesting. Joe is probably the best shooter. So if he gets hot, they could extend him, but that's really it. Moving on to Brooklyn here versus the Pelicans. So for the Brooklyn side, all these guys are pretty cheap here for the Brooklyn side. So that's why they are pretty interesting in GPPs. Bridges 7,200, Dinwiddie 6,900, and Claxton 6,800 are probably the three best options. Even though Claxton's minutes are always in question, but if you can see 30 plus minutes, I think he's a very strong play. 6,800. Cam Thomas coming off the bench there, 6,200. I want his price to move down a little bit more to take a shot on him, but we know he's a flamethrower. So if he gets hot, he could easily go for obviously smash at that price tag. So a GPP consideration. I think Cam Johnson's interesting. 6,000 starting lineup, mid 30 minutes. Obviously scoring independent. Been better at getting rebounds the past 2 games. So I think he's there. A little bit of interest. And obviously it matters kind of what they do with DFS with him being questionable. If he's good to go, I think he's a fine play. If he's out, maybe they throw Royce O'Neal in at 4,100, which would make him a pretty decent option there at that price tag. Moving on to the Pelicans here. Brandon, Zion, CJ, they're all decent plays, all secondary options for me. I mean, as I always say, when all three are healthy, CJ is probably the best right now in terms of the price tag there, 7,100. And I would say it's Ingram and then Zion. J-Val's there. Fully healthy team. As you can see, the minutes weren't the best the past 2 games, even though it's blowout. So looks like he's going to be pacing for 30, but I'd say tread lightly just because with a fully healthy team now with Larry Nance, they could definitely go smaller. 4,200. He's been strong the past 2 games there. Obviously, blowout risk, so tread a little bit lightly there. He's got a few more minutes recently, but yeah, he's looked decent since coming back from injury. So another pretty solid, cheap option there at 4,200. That's really it for me. Marshall will get those random minutes. He could pop off if you're looking for a cheaper guy there at 3,900, but nothing too crazy there for the Pelicans side. More so just decent secondary options for some GPPs. For Charlotte here, no LaMelo. Rozier is most likely out this game as well. So we get Bridges, Miller, Washington, Richards, and then probably Ish Smith. That's probably going to be starting lineup. I don't know how many minutes Ish Smith got today, but if he's going to see 20, maybe 20 to 25, 4,300, I do think he's a pretty good play there. I like Martin, probably my favorite option. Played 20 minutes, then 27. I'm not sure how many minutes he played tonight, but 5,100. If he's going to be playing mid 20 minutes, he's usually aggressive. One of those guys that can stuff the stat sheet. He looked really, really good. PJ Washington, I like him a lot, 6,400. He should be super, super aggressive. If this game stays close, there's a lot to like here for the Charlotte side just because they're all relatively cheap, but there's a lot of usage to go around for these guys. Miles Bridges, going to play a ton of minutes, going to be super aggressive. So a good amount of interest in these Charlotte guys just because they're super short-handed, and it's really only their starting five that's able to really score baskets. For the Kings side here, obviously fantastic matchup. Sabonis, Fox look fantastic if you think this game stays close. Other than that, I mean, these guys are more so risky GPP options in the mid-range. Monk's always got that random GPP upside, as you can see the past 2 games there. But then there's games where he'll go, score 20 or less fantasy points. Minutes are always in question at times. Keegan Murray, it's one of those things. Can he hit a shot? And then same thing, Kevin Huerter. He's very, very bad. The minutes are very bad on him recently. And I always mentioned Lyles is kind of one of those guys. He's going to be playing close to 20 minutes. Can have those random pop-up games if you're looking for a cheaper, center. And then moving on to the last game here, Orlando versus Golden State. Paolo's been very, very, quietly slept on this season. As you can see, he's been very, very strong here. So I've got a amount of interest in him at 8,200. I think Franz, he's been stepping up recently as well. Minutes have gone up. The shot attempts and aggressiveness have gone up from him. So they both look like interesting options that I don't think many people land on. Suggs is there. Cole Anthony's there, priced up. Minutes have not been great recently on him. Fultz might be back as well. They brought Wendell off the bench that last game. He actually had his best game since returning back from injury. A little bit of interest in him, playing kind of mid 20s minutes, 5,200. Interesting. And that's really it's for the Orlando side. And then for the Golden State side here to wrap things up, Steph, Clay, Chris Paul, Kuminga, and Trace Jackson Davis are the starters. So I like Trace Jackson Davis here a ton. Before he was playing anywhere from like 15 to 20-ish minutes, but he played 29 minutes that last game. Should be starting again. Not a lot of foul trouble risk for him, even though he's one of those guys that can find it. But yeah, 4,600, he looks like a fantastic play, kind of like a lock for tomorrow, even with that foul trouble risk. I mean, it's very cheap price tags on Steph and Clay, so I do have a good amount of interest on them. Pods went back to the bench, but he came off, played 29 minutes, so I still think he's a pretty strong play at 6,000. Paul, with him starting, I think he's firmly in play. Played 33 minutes. He was a little bit more aggressive offensively, so he should be super involved overall. I don't think the minutes are going to go crazy, probably 30, 32 for him, but at 5,600, he looks interesting. Kuminga, 5,000, just there for me. And then Wiggins, just been very, very bad off the bench. So not a lot of interest for me in him. And then Sarge, minutes have gone down a bit. Same thing with Looney, but they're there if you're looking for some cheap value. But yeah, that is a slate breakdown. Obviously, we do have some news in terms of just lineups we had to kind of wait for to see what will happen and kind of how we would dictate to kind of to the spend ups. But right now, I think the locks are going to be Trace Jackson Davis and Embiid. And then from there, we do have a good amount of different ways and routes we can go. I think it'd be a little bit better to go kind of mid-range build, but you can definitely fit in another star like SGA. Still have 5,000 left over, and then you're getting two guys who have 60, 70 plus upside, plus a guy like Trace Jackson Davis who's had really, really good upside, been very, very efficient at 4,600. So a lot of different ways to build for this slate tomorrow. So hit that like button, guys. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.